On this Friday night, quarantined in Canada. Hundreds airlifted from China settle into their temporary home at a military base.
First thing I did, just went and lay down in the snow and smelled the fresh Canadian air.
Plus, warnings of a chronic shortage of supplies. The bill for Trans Mountain, now billions more than before. What's driving up the cost of the taxpayers' pipeline? It's like a horror movie, the mob of bats forcing a town into lockdown. And icy reception to a severe storm.
Did you have to chip off your car?
Yes, it took me like a half hour, and I broke 2 of my scrapers.
The miserable mess in the Maritimes.
Global National with Dawna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Hundreds of Canadians who spent weeks stranded in the heart of the outbreak of the new coronavirus in China are now back on home soil. 2 planes carrying 215 passengers have touched down at Canadian Forces Base Trenton in Ontario. They'll spend the next 2 weeks at that base under quarantine, being monitored by medical staff to see if they develop any symptoms. Chinese media is now reporting there are more than 34,000 confirmed cases and more than 700 people have died. The bulk of those are in China. Outside China, the single largest group of confirmed cases is on a quarantined cruise ship in Japan. 61 people on board have tested positive, including 7 Canadians. Thousands of passengers on 2 other ships are also caught up in this outbreak. One ship is under quarantine. The other is stranded at sea after being barred from docking in Japan because of fears passengers might be contagious. We'll bring you the latest from those ships in just a moment, but first to CFB Trenton, where more than 200 people are settling in for a 2-week wait under quarantine. Global's Jeff Semple is there.
For the 174 passengers on board this chartered flight, stepping onto Canadian soil has rarely felt so sweet.
The first thing I did was, because I do have snow pants with me, I just went and lay down in the snow and smelled the fresh Canadian air and just enjoyed the snow falling.
This Montreal family snagged 4 coveted seats on the government flight sent to pick up Canadian passengers from the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak.
Boarding the plane, obviously we were in contact with armed forces volunteers that were there to help us evac, and then it became much more stringent.
Passengers were screened for symptoms before they boarded in Wuhan, then again when the plane stopped to refuel in Vancouver, and again after finally arriving at CFB Trenton. But their journey home isn't over yet. CFB Trenton is Canada's largest Air Force base. They fly search and rescue missions out of here and international deployments to places like Afghanistan. But for the first time in its near 90-year history, CFB Trenton is a quarantine zone. The passengers must now remain on base, mostly confined to their rooms, for 2 weeks to see if symptoms develop.
A lot of concern, a lot of worry.
Rich Fabich's toddler was with her grandparents in Wuhan when the outbreak hit. He's been scrambling to get her out.
So there's a feeling of helplessness.
His daughter was put on the flight to CFB Trenton and is now in quarantine, so he traveled here to join her.
I'm going to take the appropriate precautions, but what do I want to do? It's absolutely see her 14 days sooner.
If a passenger contracts coronavirus, they'll be transported off base to this local hospital. The mayor is now fielding calls from worried residents.
First, I guess, concern was that they're coming here with the virus. No, they're not.
But many here are actually going out of their way to welcome the new arrivals. The local grocery store is providing platters of food, even planning a party for when the quarantine is over.
They're Canadians and we take care of our own. That's just what we do.
And it hasn't gone unnoticed.
They had a lot of stuff right there waiting in terms of diapers, clothing, gloves, toques, jackets, you name it, they have it.
The government says 2/3 of Canadians in Wuhan who wanted to leave are now out, and it plans to send another plane next week to retrieve the rest. Jeff Semple, Global News, Trenton, Ontario.
Now to the hundreds of other Canadians under quarantine tonight on 2 cruise ships. At least 7 Canadians aboard the Diamond Princess have tested positive for the new coronavirus. They are now receiving treatment. Thousands of other passengers, including 271 Canadians, are stuck at sea on a 3rd cruise ship. The Westerdam is not under quarantine, but Japan is refusing to allow the vessel to dock. And as Crystal Goomansingh explains, passengers are left floating on uncertainty.
The captain is going to allow small groups of passengers to go out of their cabins.
It's a small step, but after being stuck inside the Diamond Princess cruise ship since Monday, fresh air is a luxury. Diamond Princess officials have now screened passengers they believe were potentially exposed to the virus. The Japanese Ministry of Health has advised Princess Cruises that the quarantine will end February 19th. Another ship, the Westerdam, with 271 Canadians on board, is sailing off the coast of Taiwan while it tries to secure a place to dock. There have been no reported illnesses on board. Meanwhile, Cruise Lines International Association is telling all of its members not to allow anyone to board who has visited to or been around an airport in Hong Kong, China, or Macau.
Cruise ships are basically, floating towns that where everyone is coming into close contact with each other, thousands of people potentially. So they're a perfect place where these types of infectious disease outbreaks can breed.
In the fight to stop the spread of the virus, a 14-day mandatory self-isolation is being imposed in Hong Kong for all residents arriving from mainland China. Anyone caught in violation could be fined, even jailed, up to 6 months.
The whole idea is really for this person to stay at home and not to, go out.
People are afraid of this potentially deadly virus, and they're angry. Tributes are forming to honor a doctor many consider to be among the first whistleblowers to raise the alarm about the virus.
He just tried to tell the truth. Actually, it's the regime that is allowing this virus to spread around.
Similar expressions on the streets of Beijing for Dr. Li Wenyang. I deeply regret his death and feel sincerely sad for him, said this woman, adding, I hope he did not die in vain. China says it will investigate the 34-year-old doctor's death. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
And there's another problem emerging as this new coronavirus spreads. The World Health Organization says there's a chronic shortage of masks, gloves, and other protective equipment.
There are now depleted stockpiles and backlogs of 4 to 6 months. Global stocks of masks and respirators are now insufficient to meet the needs of WHO and our partners.
The WHO says part of the reason is people who don't need to wear the masks are buying them out of fear. They want that to stop to ensure there are supplies for those, especially medical workers, who really need them. There is big news tonight about the pipeline project Canadian taxpayers own. The estimated cost of completing the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion has ballooned from $7.4 billion to $12.6 billion. That's in addition to the more than $4 billion the federal government spent to buy the project from Kinder Morgan. And that brings the total investment for taxpayers to more than $16 billion. And the project to carry more Alberta oil to the BC coast isn't even finished yet. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson is watching this. Mercedes, the finance minister held a news conference today to talk about this. How does he account for this huge jump in costs?
Well, Dawna, Finance Minister Bill Morneau says the pipeline today is dramatically different from the project that Kinder Morgan had planned in 2017. And while the new number has many gasping in sticker shock, Morneau says the increased costs mean a better pipeline, both in terms of the build and social license. The two biggest factors in the cost increase that he identified: changes in the pipeline's design and the court-mandated Indigenous consultations that had to take place before it could be built. The new blueprints, he says, make it more environmentally friendly and safer. And those consultations, of course, took time and money, as the government met with 129 Indigenous groups, some of whom still oppose the project. The CEO of Trans Mountain also said that these delays were one of the biggest factors in the increased cost.
Mercedes, when the Prime Minister made the decision to buy the pipeline project, the idea wasn't to keep it forever, but to turn around and sell it once it was de-risked. There are proposals now to buy it, including from Indigenous-led groups. Can they afford to buy it now, and is it still commercially viable?
Well, those are great questions, Dawna. And the finance minister and CEO of Trans Mountain both say the pipeline is still commercially viable, in part because it's already bringing in income now. Remember, there is a pipeline in the ground that they're twinning, and it's expected to increase in value when it's able to actually move oil in its larger iteration. But here's what Bill Morneau had to say about trying to resell it in the future and whether or not it's viable.
We went through a due diligence process to consider how this would be commercially viable. This was in the range of considerations that we looked at. Of course, the project will deliver $1.5 billion of available cash flow once it's finished, which means that it remains commercially viable.
This pipeline expansion has been promised for years as a way to get Alberta oil out to markets other than the U.S. And there have been all kinds of delays up till now. Now this $5 billion increase. What's the latest timeline, Mercedes, on when it will get built and when it might be sold?
Well, Dawna, shovels are already in the ground and they're moving forward. But as for when it will be sold, that remains to be seen. The finance minister said today that they'll sell when the time is right, and they're convinced they'll be able to find a buyer even with the higher cost. But who will be willing to buy it and when that might happen remains to be seen.
All right, Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa, thanks. The other big decision looming for the federal government is also in Alberta, the Teck Frontier oil sands mine. And tonight, Alberta is warning Ottawa not to give the province an aid package in lieu of approving it. It's a massive proposed project just south of Wood Buffalo National Park. If approved, open pit oil sands mines would cover 24,000 hectares. At peak operation, it would produce 260,000 barrels of bitumen every day. It's got all the necessary approvals. All it needs now is a yes from Ottawa, but there is plenty of pressure, including from Liberal MPs, to say no. As Heather Yourex-West explains, the Alberta government warned today that would be a huge mistake.
With just 3 weeks left until Ottawa decides the fate of a proposed oil sands mega project, the political rhetoric is ramping up.
Let me be clear, from Alberta's perspective, and we have made this clear with the federal government, this will be a clear indication on how serious the Prime Minister is and his government to working towards unity in this country.
An independent review panel has already recommended the $20 billion Teck Frontier mine proposal be approved. The company has signed agreements with 14 Indigenous groups in the area. But for a government committed to achieving net zero emissions by 2050, clearing the way for a project that would increase carbon emissions from the oil sands is complicated.
The challenge that the feds have is, what does that mean to the Paris commitments? Also, they're taking heat from environmentalists because they bought Trans Mountain and they're pushing Trans Mountain through. Now they've got this frontier mine on the other side.
In our view,
on Friday, the provincial government responded to reports that Ottawa was considering a compensation package for Alberta workers in the event Cabinet rejects Teck. But the federal finance minister says no decisions have been made.
The issues around Teck Frontier are separate and distinct. That's going through a process that's going to the Cabinet. It's unrelated to the work that I'm doing on thinking about how we can make sure that Alberta continues to have a robust economy.
Alberta's government is calling for the mine's approval on its own merits, asking that the project not be politicized in any way. The warning that if it's rejected, there will be a political price to pay.
And Heather joins me now. Heather, some other companies are abandoning their investments in the Alberta oil sands. I understand Teck itself has not made a final decision on whether it will even go ahead with this project.
Yeah, that's right. Teck's CEO has said that even after federal approval, the project needs 3 conditions to be met before the company will go ahead. It needs TMX to be finished, it needs an investment partner, and it needs oil prices to go up. So there's a very real chance that this mega project never moves forward, approval or not. But that doesn't diminish the political stakes here between Alberta and Ottawa. Dawna?
All right, Heather Yourex-West in Calgary, thanks. The standoff continues between the RCMP and protesters over the Coastal GasLink pipeline in northern BC.
This is unceded territory!
Protesters say 2 more people were arrested today after a tactical team of RCMP surrounded another Wet'suwet'en blockade after yesterday's arrests. The RCMP is enforcing a court order to allow Coastal GasLink workers into the region to begin construction on the $6 billion pipeline, which Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs oppose, though elected leaders authorized the work to go ahead. Today, in a show of solidarity, protesters supporting what's happening in northern BC blocked via rail traffic on a key line in southern Ontario, saying they will back off when the RCMP leave. Some news tonight about national employment levels in Canada. Statistics Canada says thanks to gains in manufacturing, construction and agriculture, more than 34,000 new jobs were added last month. Most of them were in Quebec, where nearly 19,000 new jobs were created in January. In contrast, Alberta lost nearly the same amount. Overall, the national unemployment rate fell slightly last month to 5.5%. It's been more than 24 hours since a train derailment erupted into flames. Coming up, what's stopping investigators from reaching the scene? Oil cars from that derailed CP train in central Saskatchewan are still burning, sending thick black smoke high into the sky, and it's preventing investigators from reaching the site. 31 cars carrying crude oil left the tracks. A dozen burst into flames near Guernsey early yesterday morning. The second crude oil train to jump the tracks in that area in under 2 months. Canada's Transportation Safety Board is investigating both derailments, which happened less than 10 kilometers apart.
The amount of trains that are going through and the amount of oil carried on those trains is just, it's mind-boggling, and really I wish they'd get some pipelines built, because especially now when it's twice so close to us, and it could have been in town easily.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has arrived in Ethiopia's capital as part of an 8-day charm campaign. He's hoping to convince African leaders to back Canada's bid for a United Nations Security Council seat. Our chief political correspondent, David Akin, is traveling with the Prime Minister, and so is someone else. David?
Well, Dawna, that secret weapon is Masai Ujiri, who basketball fans know is the president of the reigning NBA champion Toronto Raptors. Ujiri joined the PM's delegation in Ottawa, made the 17-hour journey here to Addis Ababa. Ujiri, who is Nigerian, joined Trudeau as he was welcomed by Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. He says his role here will be to open doors.
I have relationships with leaders here, and any way we can help, anywhere I can help, it's a big part of making the world better.
Basketball fans know Ujiri is not the only African connection with the Raptors. All-star Pascal Siakam is from Cameroon, center Serge Ibaka is from Congo, and forward OG Anunoby has Nigerian roots. Trudeau and Ujiri will be here in Ethiopia until Monday. That's an unusually long stay for a Canadian Prime Minister in any one country, but Trudeau plans to use that time to meet as many of the leaders as he can from the 54 members of the African Union. Dawna?
All right, David Akin in Ethiopia, thank you. Ahead, a record downpour down under brings relief.
You're watching Global National.
It's being called a bat tornado. This colony of fruit bats has invaded a small Australian town. There are about 300,000 of them in a town of just 4,300 people. Locals say they smell, they constantly screech, and they worry the bats are a potential health risk. Australian bats are known to carry a rabies-like disease that's transmitted through scratches and bites, though experts say the potential to contract it is low. So much rain is falling in Sydney, Australia. Forecasters are warning of potentially life-threatening flash flooding. Severe weather warnings have been issued for parts of New South Wales, with damaging winds, heavy rain, and abnormally high tides expected. And Friday was the wettest day recorded in well over a year in Sydney. It's hoped that rain will help firefighters in New South Wales get 17 blazes under control. Antarctica has recorded its hottest temperature on record. A research station on the northern tip of the continent recorded a high of 18.3 degrees Celsius, and that breaks a previous record of 17.5 degrees in 2015, a rise of nearly 1 degree in 5 years. The Antarctic Peninsula is one of the fastest warming places on Earth. Nearly all the region's glaciers are melting. Scientists say it has warmed nearly 3 degrees Celsius over the last 50 years. Snowstorm sequel next. Another winter blast slams Atlantic Canada. Snow clearing crews in Quebec are hard at work as a massive winter storm wallops the south. It's shut down schools, caused hundreds of collisions, and disrupted dozens of flights. This is the biggest snowfall of the season in Quebec. Up to 40 centimeters was expected to fall today. And in Atlantic Canada, that same storm system has left thousands of homes and businesses without power, and it's made for treacherous driving. Schools are closed, some flights are delayed or canceled. As Ross Lord reports, people there have already had enough of winter.
In northern New Brunswick, 45 centimeters of snow is treated like just another day.
Well, this is a piece of cake, huh? We're living here year-round.
An overnight storm also brought freezing rain and ice buildup, but the fact is, many Maritimers prefer snow above all else.
I'm stomping through the snow stuff instead of along the icier sidewalk.
It took me like a half hour, and I broke 2 of my scrapers.
Like a walk in an icy park, called off for their own safety, the preference for snow does have its limits, especially after the historic snowfall in Newfoundland last month, which brought more than 90 centimeters.
Yeah, it's not nearly as bad here as it is out there. My house isn't buried, so there's that. I got that going for me, which is good.
This storm forced schools to close in all of Nova Scotia, widespread flight cancellations, and thousands of power outages. And the storm's extensive reach means it isn't over yet.
As far as southern Quebec and New Brunswick, we're talking 30 to 60 centimeters of snow and whiteout conditions on this Friday afternoon and evening.
At least it will be gone soon enough for many Atlantic Canadians to enjoy a weekend without any cleanup. Although some refuse to let it cramp their style even before it's over. Ross Lord, Global News, Halifax.
It is only early February. That is Global National for this Friday. I'm Dawna Friesen. Tonight's Air Canada is Lighthouse Cove in Lakeshore, Ontario. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Robin Gill will be here at the anchor desk over the weekend, and I will see you back here on Monday. Have a lovely weekend. Bye-bye.